everybody. My name is Tess Harris, and I'm the Staff Hearing Officer for today's meeting. It's January 7th, 2026. Happy New Year. We are back in 2026. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is 9 o'clock this morning. The first item we have are requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of X agenda items. That's item 1A. We did not receive any requests at this time. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to item B, announcements and appeals. I do have an announcement. On December 18th, 2025, the Planning Commission denied the appeal regarding the staff hearing officer's decision of approval on October 15th, 2025 for a coastal development permit for 3139 Seacliff Drive. There were actually two appeals during the Planning Commission meeting on December 18th, but that project is able to move forward at this time, and no appeals from the Planning Commission have been filed either. So moving on from item 1B to item 1C for comments from members of the public pertaining to items that are not on the agenda today. If anybody in the audience would like to make a public comment for any item not on the agenda, please come on forward to the podium. And I'm not seeing any movement in the audience. Ms. Gu, do we have anybody online that would like to speak?
Upon checking on Zoom, I do not see any raised hands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll now go ahead and move on to the first item of the item 2A, the first project on the agenda. It's for 4233 Pozo Circle. It's St. Vincent's Child Care Center. I'm going to go ahead and begin reading the item into the record, and then I will have staff provide a brief presentation. The St. Vincent's campus is a 19.5-acre mixed-use development providing services for low-income families and seniors, including housing, adult day health programs, sisters' residences, and administrative offices, a child care center, transitional housing for single mothers, residential program for adolescent girls, a multi-purpose room, a storage and maintenance building, a swimming pool complex, and recreational facilities. The existing 3,463 square foot child care center is located on assessor's parcel number 059-490-030. The project consists of a 490 net square foot addition to the child care center, along with interior tenant improvements, mechanical and plumbing work, and limited site improvements to allow for the addition of a new classroom and accessible restroom. The project includes relocating a shed outside of the setbacks. The applications under the jurisdiction of the staff hearing officer today are a setback modification that would allow the addition within the interior setback and determining that the project is categorically exempt from CEQA pursuant to section 15301 for existing facilities. And so the project qualifies for the exemption under 15301. It's because it allows for additions to existing structures, and it complies with all conditions of this exemption. I'm going to go ahead and now turn it over to Ms. Ernest for a brief presentation.
One moment while we pull up the project materials. Okay, good morning, and thank you, Ms. Harris. My name is Carly Ernest, Associate Planner with the City of Santa Barbara's Planning Division, and I'll be presenting the project at 4233 Pozo Circle and the request for an interior setback modification. And if Ms. Gu could please switch the screen to, thank you. So starting with the project location here, the project is located on the St. Vincent's campus, which is at the intersection of Calle Real and Highway 154. And the the entire St. Vincent's campus is 19.5 acres and was annexed to the city of Santa Barbara in 2002 from unincorporated county jurisdiction. And this image is a little blurry here, but the existing child care center is the most eastern building on the campus. And then in looking at some photos from Highway 154 in Calle Real, you can see from the intersection here, it's just slightly visible. And then this would be coming down the pass. So looking right, again, it's slightly visible there, but screened by some existing vegetation in the topography there. And then just another view from the intersection. So slightly visible from the intersection there. And the entire campus is zoned RM, but the Child Care Center operates with a conditional use permit that was also granted by the Planning Commission in 2002 as part of that annexation. And prior to that, the Child Care Center operated successfully with a conditional use permit from the County Planning Commission prior to its annexation to the city. Then just looking at some photos of the building. So this is the front entrance here, view of the west elevation, and then around the side, the south elevation, where I think is the best view of where we can see where the proposed addition is going. So again, south elevation here, this is an existing play structure, and behind that is a patio area where the addition would be going. And some other views of the other side of the building. And then going to the site plan, let me scroll. So this is a site plan of the entire St. Vincent's campus, but again, the Child Care Center is the building on the eastern portion and outlined in red here. There's that existing play structure we saw in the photos, and then let me actually go to the enlarged site plan so we can look at the building that's within a portion of the interior setback. So here's the enlarged site plan. Here's the building footprint. And the existing building is non-conforming to the interior setback. The setback requirement per the zoning ordinance for non-residential structures in the RM zone is 12 feet for that interior setback. So this is the property line, and this is the 12-foot setback line. So this, let me zoom in, is the portion of the existing building that is within the setback, and then here is the proposed addition. It's a 490 net square foot addition, and here's the portion that would further encroach into that interior setback. And then just for a reminder that this is within your purview today, the request for that interior setback modification to allow the addition to further encroach into the interior setback. But I think, let me pull up the elevations and we can have another view of that encroachment. So here are the proposed elevations. So from the north, here's the property line and then the 12-foot setback line. So this is the portion of the building that would be within that interior setback. And then also from the south, you can see the portion of the building that would be within the interior setback. So it would be 5 feet 2 inches from the property line. That's an increase from the current encroachment by 3 feet 4 inches, for a total encroachment of 6 feet 10 inches into the required 12-foot interior setback. And then just pull up the renderings for a better view also. So here's the area of the proposed addition, and the setback line isn't on here, but I think you can tell this is the portion that would be within the interior setback. And staff is supportive of the modification because the required findings can be made. This is because the purpose of the 12-foot interior setback for non-residential structures in the RM zone is to provide sufficient buffering between residential and non-residential uses. But in this case, because the child care center is buffered by public right-of-way and is adjacent to other non-residential uses in the St. Vincent's campus, there would be no impact to adjacent residential neighborhoods. Staff also believes that approval of the modification would prevent financial hardship to St. Vincent's, which is a nonprofit organization, and this design minimizes the accessibility improvements that would be required. And then in terms of design, the existing building would match, or the proposed addition would match the exterior materials of the existing building, as you can see in the renderings here. And it was also reviewed by ABR, who found the setback modification to be reasonable and had no issues with the design. And also just wanted to clarify that the addition would not cause an increase in the enrollment of the child care center, or is not intended for them to increase their capacity. It's just intended to better serve the current capacity. And then just a note on environmental review. The project qualifies for a CEQA exemption under section 15301 of the CEQA guidelines, which allows for additions to existing structures. The project site there's a creek, Cieneguitas Creek, that runs through the southern portion of the project site here, which does place a portion of the St. Vincent's campus, including the child care center, within a FEMA floodway. And there is no construction allowed within a floodway unless there is a no-rise certificate that's prepared that demonstrates that the construction would not increase conveyance of that creek. And the project did have a flood conveyance analysis prepared by Ashley and Vance Engineering, which found that the no-rise condition can be met. And the addition would also be designed to comply with the city's floodplain management ordinance criteria. And I believe that concludes my presentation, but I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Ernest. I'm going to go ahead. I don't believe we have the applicant with us, or do we? Oh, we do. Okay, apologies. Is there anything as the applicant that you would like to add to the presentation? If so, please come on up and feel free to add anything you'd like.
Hi, my name is Luis de la Torre with 96 Architects. I do believe that Ms. Ernest has made a really good presentation of the project. We have nothing to add. I'm very happy with the support of the project that the planning department staff has shown on this project, and we're excited to see it moving forward.
Great, thank you so much. So now I'm gonna open it up for public comment. Do we have any members of the public in the audience that would like to speak on the item? Not seeing any movement. Do we have anybody, Ms. Gu, on Zoom?
On checking Zoom, I do not see any raised hands for speakers on this item.
Okay, great. So now I'll take it back with some comments, and I don't know that I actually do have questions, but so one, I have been at the St. Vincent's campus before. When my daughter was young, I had toured the child care center, so I'm familiar with the area and passed it many times. I think it's a great project overall. The one question I did have is around the increase of enrollment. And Ms. Ernest, could you maybe walk the public through what it would, if they did want to increase enrollment for the child care center in the future, what they would need to do in order to do that?
Sure, thank you, Ms. Harris. So the child care center operates with a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission that was transferred over when it was annexed to the city in 2002. And if they were to increase the enrollment, this would require an amendment to the conditional use permit granted by the Planning Commission. And this would look at the impacts from increasing the enrollment, such as traffic, noise, that would all be reanalyzed if they were to increase the enrollment. But that is not proposed at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I think, it's already, the site has a patio in the location that the addition is going to be located on or very close to. There's also no residential structures really, between the Highway 154 and the facility itself. So again, as Ms. Ernest stated, the purpose of the RM zone with the non-residential setback requirement is to provide that buffer from a residential structure. The residential setback is actually lower than the non-residential setback in the RM zone. So while it doesn't quite meet that either, it's certainly much closer to that setback requirement. I still believe that the setback is sufficient given the constraints of the site and the need to provide more accessibility and provide a little bit more space for the existing facility. While it is not, in my purview and would be the purview of the Planning Commission, I do think that in the future, if St. Vincent's has the interest in increasing enrollment, that is certainly a possibility, especially with an expansion like this. Of course, depending on what the Planning Commission ultimately decides, if that's something that they wanted to pursue. But the need for childcare in this community is very high, and I think doing anything to improve the facilities for childcare services is certainly something that city staff are supportive of. Let's see. So really with that, I'm going to go ahead and make my findings that the mixed-use development and the addition of the project is sufficient, that the setback modification to allow the addition with the interior setback is approved because, again, of the zone, the RM zone, and the difference between the residential and the non-residential setback requirements. It's a little bit closer to the residential setback requirement, and there are no residences immediately adjacent to the property. It's also, very close to Highway 154, which I would imagine has quite a bit more noise and commotion than the child care facility itself. For St. Vincent's, it's usually pretty calm and peaceful in that type of an environment. So I'm certainly not concerned with anything like that. I think in terms of the, being in the FEMA floodway, I do appreciate that they received a no-rise certificate, certainly wanting to be mindful and careful of any facility that is placed in a floodway with concerns just around, residents or members of the public being in that in a any kind of a storm situation. So I imagine that St. Vincent's has precautions around that, and given that this is a child care center and not a residential structure, not something that people are sleeping in, certainly comfortable with that as well. I'll also go ahead and determine that the project is categorically exempt from CEQA under Section 15301 for existing facilities. It is an existing facility, has been in operation for many years, and is transferred over to the city in 2002 as meaning under sort of the city jurisdiction rather than the county. So again, have no problem with it being exempt from CEQA as well. So with that, the project is approved. My decision as a staff hearing officer can be appealed to the Planning Commission within 10 calendar days of the decision. Again, also, any member of the Planning Commission can suspend my decision within that same 10 calendar day period. But I wish you and St. Vincent's all the best as you go through the building permit process, and look forward to seeing the facility up and running.
Great. We'll call you as soon as. Thank you.
Thank you both. We will now move into item 2B for 217 South Milpas Street. So just going to give us a moment to set up here. Okay, so for 217 South Milpas Street, I'm going to go ahead and read the project description into the record, and then again, I will turn it over to the staff, which is Ms. Ernest, who will provide a brief staff presentation for the item as well. So 217 South Milpas Street, it's an amendment to a CDP and a parking modification. The 8,350 square foot site is currently developed with a 2-story single unit residence and a 4-car detached garage. The garage is under construction for conversion to an accessory dwelling unit permitted under Building Permit 2024-03205. The project proposes an amendment to the previously approved coastal development permit under PLN 2022-00205 that permitted the ADU, exterior alterations to the existing single-unit residence, a duplex above a 6-car carport, and associated landscape and site improvements. The amendment includes removing the duplex from the scope of work and instead constructing a 1,675 square foot 2-story single-unit residence adjacent to the ADU, with changes to the landscape and site improvements to accommodate the reconfigured site, and 5 uncovered parking spaces are proposed. The applications under my purview today at this hearing are an amendment to the coastal development permit that would allow the development in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone, a coastal development permit to allow the proposed development in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone, a parking modification to allow 1 required parking space as uncovered, and determining that the project is exempt from environmental review under section 15303, which is the new construction or conversion of small structures section in SEQA. And it's exempt. It's proposed to be exempt from further environmental review under that section because that section allows for construction of up to 6 dwelling units, and it complies with conditions of the exemption, which are all listed on this slide here. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Ernest for a staff presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Harris, and again, good morning. I'm Carly Ernest, Associate Planner with the City of Santa Barbara's Planning Division, and we'll be presenting the project at 217 South Milpa Street. This is an amendment to a previously approved coastal development permit that was approved by the Staff Hearing Officer in February of 2024, and I'll describe the changes to the project after going over the project location. But it is located just south of Highway 101 at 217 South Milpa Street. It is currently developed with, and let me go to the photos here. It is currently developed with an existing single-unit residence here at the street frontage, and then at the rear is this garage structure. The middle of the site is pretty vacant there, and then looking at some of the photos of that existing residence, there's that structure. So this is from the sidewalk, closer up. Again, from the sidewalk. And then this is going down the driveway, and this is a view of the ADU that's currently under construction. And I'll pull up the previously approved plans so we can compare the changes. But again, there's the ADU that's under construction. But let's look at the previously approved plans. So the previous project required a coastal development permit to convert the garage to an ADU, and also to construct a new duplex over a carport, and also exterior improvements to the existing residence. And here are those approved plans from the Staff Hearing Officer hearing. And then the project in front of you today is for an amendment to that coastal development permit to instead construct a new single unit residence instead of that duplex and carport structure. And there are building permits that have been issued for the ADU. As we could see in the photos, the construction is currently underway of that ADU. And there's also a building permit that's been issued for the exterior improvements to this residence. So the amendment is to instead construct this single unit residence instead of the duplex, and then also some changes to the site configuration and landscaping as part of that. The parking requirements did change. So the project today proposes 5 uncovered parking spaces, which does meet the number of required parking spaces per the city zoning ordinance. However, it does not meet the covered parking requirements, which would require 1 covered parking space. So a parking modification is also requested today to provide that covered parking space as uncovered. So there would be a total of 5 uncovered parking spaces. And we can look at the elevations of the proposed single unit residence. So these are of the existing residence at the front. And then the proposed residence behind that would match in architectural character. And also the ADU they would all be consistent in architectural design and colors and materials. So here's the elevations there of that proposed structure. But I think just going back to the site plan and to talk a little bit about staff supportability, the staff is supportive of the coastal development permit because in order to approve a coastal development permit, it needs to be consistent with coastal policies of the Coastal Act and city's coastal land use plan. And staff found it consistent with all of the applicable policies that are related to public access, water quality, scenic resources, and visual quality, as well as cultural resources. So staff is supportive of that amendment because all of the policies can be met, and it's consistent with the Title 28 City's Coastal Zoning Ordinance. And then for the parking modification, staff is supportive of the parking modification to provide that one covered parking space as uncovered, because also the required findings to approve a parking modification can be made. And this is because the uncovered space provides more opportunities for landscape and open space, and the commercial zoning district strives to provide a more desirable living environment for the residents, given that it's adjacent to other commercial uses. So we believe that providing that space as uncovered instead of covered provides more opportunities for that landscape and open space to make a more desirable living environment there. And also the required findings can be made by the staff hearing officer because there's no other discretionary approval that's required by the planning commission, which is why it's under the staff hearing officer's purview today. And then for design review, the project was reviewed by ABR in November. Overall, they were supportive of the design. They did have some comments on the walkways, reconfiguring some of the pedestrian walkways for better circulation, and had some suggestions on the trees, but overall were supportive of the modification request to provide that space as uncovered, as well as the overall architectural design. And then looking at environmental review, so that it is adjacent to Highway 101 within 100 feet. So there are concerns with air quality as well as noise levels. But the project is designed to protect air quality with, or the air quality impacts are addressed by proposing interior air filtration systems for each of the units and utilizing some existing as well as proposed vegetative screening to protect air quality there. And that's also a requirement of the city's ordinance to comply if you're within a certain distance of Highway 101. And then with regards to noise levels, there was a noise study that was prepared for the original project and an addendum that was prepared for the changes to the project. And it had some recommendations for noise attenuating wall assembly and dual glaze windows at both the north elevation of the proposed residence and on the ADU to bring the noise levels down to an acceptable, both interior and, well, for interior, the design would bring it down to acceptable interior noise levels. And then it also found that the noise levels for the private open yard would also be acceptable due to the inset design of the private open yard areas and balconies. So because of that, staff found it qualified for a CEQA exemption under Section 15303 of the CEQA guidelines that allows for construction of new dwelling units. And I believe that concludes my presentation, but I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Ernest. Do we have anybody from the applicant team that would like to speak or make any comments? If you do, please come on up.
Hello, I am Lonnie Roy. I'm the agent for the property owner. I think Carly did a fantastic presentation. I'll just speak a little bit to kind of the intentions and some of the ideas behind some of the changes and the exception. So as mentioned, the project was originally approved with a two-story duplex. And at the time that the owner went to construct that, along with the ADU, construction costs had escalated quite a bit, and that building was pretty expensive because it was essentially a soft story where the ground floor was just all carports. So the structural costs were quite significant. So they asked us to look at an alternative design that used more conventional construction. So that's where we pivoted to the single-family home, which reduced the parking requirement by one space and allowed us to do a conventional slab on grade. And we think the design kind of matches the residential development and kind of typology to the north and the east. So we think it's compatible with the neighborhood in that respect. And then the idea with the design exception for not providing the covered parking space is that although there is enough width in the lot to provide it, the property to the south is a zero lot line construction, so it would push our parking really close to that building, and we were concerned about protecting that private property from cars backing out of parking spaces on our space, on our lot, and potentially hitting that building. And then also the livability in terms that it allowed us to provide some landscape planting and some screening along that rather large wall along that southerly property line. So that was kind of the reasoning of why we were or are requesting that. And ABR supported that intent. And then due to kind of time limitations, we weren't able to modify or integrate some of those ABR comments, but I can kind of speak to them a little bit. So it's the north walkway. Yeah, pull up the site. So that northerly walkway north of this proposed single-family home to the ADU, I mean, they thought the amount of walkways was a little excessive, which we get. The reason that walkway is there is because the entry to the ADU is along that north. So it's our intention to remove, that walkway there, which currently has the cursor, and replace it with some flagstone steppers and provide a ground cover landscape in between to soften that and reduce the amount of hardscape. There's two colors of pavement in the driveway, the lighter gray, that's to denote a pedestrian walkway area. So they asked for that to be changed to a pavers instead of a alternative color concrete. So we're intending to make that change, as well as probably integrating the stepper concept for the pedestrian walkway along that side, because they thought there was some conflict with the parking space and the walkway along that south side. And then regarding the tree species, there was a palm tree species proposed in that plant area against the adjacent building that they thought the trunk size would grow too large in the long term. So that's going to be substituted with a king palm. And then, there are some columnar trees along the north and the east property line for the air quality. So we'll be adding one other tree species in there per their request. So that's how we're intending to address ABR's comments to the plan. And we expect to go back pretty shortly after hopefully getting approval here. We appreciate you taking a look at the project.
Great, thank you very much. Just a couple questions before I open it up for public comment. This plan right here with the landscape detail to the planting plan, Ms. Ernest or to the applicant, are the trees that are shown existing or proposed? Particularly the ones that are, I'm more focused on where the proposed structure is located and particularly around the side of the 101.
They're all proposed.
Okay, great. And then just in terms of, screening, it's vegetation. I see that with the tire shop on the south side that it looks like a wall that is immediately adjacent to that, as well as it looks like you'll be doing screening as well there. What about any kind of walls or other noise limiting factors for the east and southern sides of the property?
So on the, the plans currently show on the north and the east property line, proposed new fence, which I think you could tell from the photos had since been constructed. And then in the interim, the owner has planted some vines along that fence. So that's the extent. And then the southerly property line is pretty much already constrained by the tire shop wall. There is a private yard area proposed on the south side of the single-family home, which you can kind of see there. So there would be a new fence consistent with what was constructed on the north and the east property line to enclose that private yard area for the single-family home.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. The reason I ask, and Ms. Ernest, this might be something just to provide to for ABR, but is that landscaping is so important on this site, particularly given just because it's in a commercial area with Highway 101 immediately adjacent, with a commercial property immediately adjacent. I do want to make sure that if this moves forward, that there's sufficient screening and a bit, even though this is slightly outside of what's before me, I do want to make the comment of just ensuring that whatever trees are placed are going to be trees that are screening, and where the concern lies is really around palms. They're beautiful. They're in the area, they make sense for a lot of reasons, but but they are not trees that will screen any kind of noise or visibility from the highway or from commercial property. So I do want to make sure that comment is at least forwarded on when it gets to the next stage. I'm going to go ahead and pause there and open it up for public comment. If there's anybody in the room that would like to make a public comment, you can come up to the podium. I'm not seeing any movement in the room. Ms. Gu, do we have anybody online?
Upon checking Zoom, I do not see any raised hands for a comment on this item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll close public comment, and I'm going to bring it on back. So I do have another question, maybe more to the applicant, but I wanted to ask really, why not provide, a parking garage or some kind of covered parking structure? It doesn't have to be a garage facility. It could just be a carport. Why not have a carport in front of the proposed unit and just cover those parking spaces?
It goes back to kind of the width of the parking spaces. When you go to garage or carport, the width of the spaces does increase by a few feet. And we were just concerned about the adjacency to that zero lot line structure to the south, and the potential for, as parking spaces got closer to that, for cars to back into and damage that structure. And also from an aesthetic standpoint, having the ability to soften that large wall, because it is essentially like a 1.5-story tall CMU wall along there. So it's primarily for those two reasons that we're requesting the modification to have uncovered.
And did you look at doing some kind of a carport facility or some covered parking on the northerly side? I understand the reason for not wanting to do it against the tire shop because of the large wall immediately adjacent, and I agree with you. I think that wouldn't be the best right next to it. But what about on the north side? If you were to do, one or two of the spaces rather than all of them.
Yeah, it still kind of goes back to, even adding in one space, it does increase the width of that parking run by about 2 feet.
Okay.
So even if the garage or carport structure was more to the north, it would still have that ripple effect of pushing the parking, because the parking's already essentially on the northerly property line, so it could only move south towards the adjacent commercial structure.
Okay, great. And then can you talk a little bit about, it looks like there is a large, I recognize that you need space to back out of a parking space and be able to maneuver easily, but can you talk a little bit about just the amount of space in between the existing structure and the proposed unit? And if you looked at shrinking that space, and I'm talking about sort of where that parking is, shrinking the space a little bit to provide more screening or more, just more vegetative cover.
So it's primarily to meet transportation and kind of having a turnaround requirement. Although it depends how you interpret it, if you need a turnaround or not. They determined that you did, so providing that larger backup space provides the ability for a car to turn into that lot and back out and go back out in one turn movement by having that amount of space. If a car, say a guest or someone, goes back there and all the parking spaces are full, it allows for a vehicle to get out of that lot without necessarily having to back out, which is a safety hazard, I would say, on that section of South Milpas Street.
Understood. Okay. And where I'm kind of going with this, I have a little bit of concern that there's the potential then, because the space is so large, for people to actually park immediately behind the existing unit on Milpas Street itself, and and sort of park parallel against that unit, and then it, instead of 5 cars, it becomes 8 or 7 or a lot more, and looks like a very large parking lot, which is not, which I don't believe is in the best interest of the property, or of the intent of having residential units on this site. So I will just make that comment and ask that, as the applicant, before it goes forward into design review, that you do a little bit more sort of analysis or research into how you might be able to accomplish something there. And Ms. Ernest, that might also be just a comment to forward. I recognize that there may be some differences in what the transportation team is conveying, and certainly want to make sure that there is space for somebody to be able to back up and get out onto the driveway. So that is, that's the priority. But if there are ways to soften it a little bit, add a little bit more landscaping, that would certainly help me in approving this project in this site. So, not necessarily. Well, I'll let Ms. Ernest figure out sort of how you approach that.
Okay, I would just like to clarify that the only way to really pass those comments on to APR, I would say, were through a condition, but the condition could be phrased as a study, the extra space in the parking area, and find ways to prevent additional vehicles from parking there. Maybe it could be through signage, but I would recommend it be added as a condition of approval. But the wording of that condition can just be to study with the transportation and planning divisions.
That would be great. Yeah, if you could add that condition, that would be great. And I would maybe caution against actually signage, I think. But perhaps there are low-level things that could be placed that are not going to cause an issue if somebody was to back into them, but to maybe emphasize the walkway a little bit more to just, overall soften that site. So I would like to place that condition on this project. And then I would also, as part of that study, would also like to add that that the applicant study the landscaping for the site, and with an emphasis on landscaping that will screen noise and provide benefits in terms of air quality, and just make sure that is looked at thoroughly before it goes back for design review. It's certainly an interesting site. I've passed it many times. I'm very familiar with this property, and it's a unique site. And as the staff hearing officer, I want to see more housing development in the community. So this is certainly a a positive in that sense. I understand the challenge that was faced from the 2024 approval with the duplex and wanting to convert it over to a single unit residence. I'm comfortable with that amendment to that. But I do just want to make sure that that livability is really thought through on this site because it is so unique to residential development, and really there is not much around it. It's with 101 behind it, as well as just a little bit, it's really cut in that triangle space where Highway 101 is located. And so wanting to be really careful of just how it's structured, as I'm sure you are as the designer as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and approve the project subject to the condition of approval that I added to the coastal development permit. So I'll approve the amendment that allows the proposed development in the non-appealable jurisdiction of the coastal zone. As Ms. Ernest stated, all policies for the coastal land use plan can still be met as part of that amendment. So that is why I'm comfortable making that amendment. And I understand the challenges that were faced with construction for that. The parking modification is the one that I have more trouble with. But given the condition, I will go ahead and approve the parking modification. It is subject to the condition of approval that requires studying the space, the overall space immediately adjacent to the 5 uncovered parking spaces, studying the possibility of a carport even for 1 or 2 of the spaces, and studying landscaping immediately adjacent to the parking spaces, as well as studying landscaping on the really on all 3 sides on all 4 sides of that proposed new unit. So making sure there's sufficient landscaping there, as well as sufficient landscaping as it looks like there's larger trees immediately adjacent to the ADU. But I will go ahead and make that modification with that condition. And then I will determine that the project is categorically exempt under section 15303 for new construction or conversion of small structures. Again, it's an amendment to a project that was already approved, and really just changing what that from the duplex to the single unit residence, and making some parking changes. So with that, I wish the applicant the best in the design process and moving the project forward. And thank you, Ms. Ernest, for your presentation. And I will go ahead and close the item, approve the project. My decision is subject to an appeal. It can be appealed to the Planning Commission within 10 calendar days of the decision, and a member of the Planning Commission can also suspend my decision within 10 calendar days. The appeal information is up on the screen in terms of how to file it. And with that, wish you the best of luck. And this staff hearing officer meeting for January 7th of 2026 is now adjourned.